Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another installment of There You Go with Bryan. It was in the smoke-filled back room of a neighborhood bar named The Hub, located at 294 Madison Street in downtown Chicago, that Big Jim Kennelly leaned in close to his friends at the table and told them of his plans. Big Jim ran the most successful counterfeit ring in the country. It was so successful, in fact, that because of his operation, the U.S. government had to recall all $5 bills so that new ones could be printed. The main reason for the success of the gang was because of Benjamin Boyd. He was arguably the best engraver in America. He was so talented, in fact, that it's said that because of his artistry, half the currency in America was actually fake. The only problem was Boyd had been arrested and now sat in Joliet State Penitentiary serving 10 years for passing counterfeit bills around Chicago. Without their engraver, Big Jim and his gang were at a dead end. But Jim had come up with a solution to spring Boyd. It was bold, but not as risky as you might think. If caught, they might only serve 12 months in jail. For you see, in 1876, kidnapping was a crime only if the person you were kidnapping was alive. And Big Jim and his gang were about to kidnap someone who had been dead for the past 11 years. But it wasn't just anyone. It was the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Doctors had pronounced President Lincoln dead at 7:22 a.m. on Saturday, April 15, 1865. While spending the evening at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., Lincoln had wanted to take a break from pressures of the White House when at 10:15 p.m., John Wilkes Booth had stepped into the president's private box and placed a Derringer pistol to the back of the unsuspecting president's head. With one pull of the trigger, Booth changed history forever. President Lincoln lingered for the next 9 hours until he succumbed to his mortal wound. The country and the world, for that matter, were plunged into a state of mourning not seen in modern times. The funeral train carrying the president's body proceeded from Washington, D.C., and took weeks to reach its final destination in Springfield, Illinois, stopping many times along the way to allow citizens to pay their respects and see President Lincoln one last time before he was laid to rest in a makeshift tomb. You see, his permanent tomb needed to be built, and it would take several years to complete, but Lincoln would rest for those few years in a temporary tomb at Oak Ridge Cemetery. When President Lincoln's body arrived in Springfield, he was afforded all the respect and honor befitting his position and importance. After the last prayer was said over the casket, Abraham Lincoln was lowered into a concrete sarcophagus that was sealed with plaster of Paris. The doors were closed and a padlock was installed on those doors. Everyone went home and life went on for the next 11 years. No further security was issued. No armed guards, no security fencing, no gates at the cemetery for that matter. After all, who would dare disrespect the corpse of a martyred president? As Big Jim put his plan into motion, Kennelly recruited 2 members of his gang, Terrence Mullen, a saloon keeper, and Jack Hughes, a sometimes manufacturer of counterfeit nickels, to kidnap Lincoln's body. For ransom, they would demand $200,000 in cash, the equivalent of $4.5 million today, and a full pardon for the engraver, Boyd. But they made a significant mistake. Neither Mullen nor Hughes had any body-snatching experience, so they invited a man named Louis Sweigels, who they thought was a grave robber, to help them. They couldn't have made a worse choice, because Sweigels was not a grave robber at all. In fact, he was a paid informant for the Secret Service. Sweigels played his part as a double agent very well, reporting every detail of the plot to his boss, Patrick D. Terrell, chief of the Chicago District Office of the Secret Service. The target date was set for November the 7th. It was Election Day, and the gang thought that the attention would be elsewhere, away from the Oak Ridge Cemetery. On the night Sweigel accompanied Mullen and Hughes to Oak Ridge Cemetery, Terrell and his agents were lying in wait for them at Lincoln's tomb. witnesses for the comedy of errors that was soon to begin. Although Mullen and Hughes were career criminals, neither one of them could pick a lock to save their lives, so they had to cut through the padlock with a file. Once inside the tomb chamber, they found that the lid to the sarcophagus was easy to remove, but lifting Lincoln's 500-pound cedar and lead coffin was nearly impossible. The inept grave robbers were considering their options when a detective's pistol accidentally went off outside. Mullen and Hughes bolted. A midnight chase ensued around the darkened cemetery, ended up with police shooting at the criminals and at each other. Eventually, Mullins and Hughes escaped and headed straight back to their saloon in Chicago, where Terrell arrested them a couple of days later. Interestingly enough, police found a map of the Oak Ridge Cemetery behind the bar, hidden in a bronze bust of Abraham Lincoln. Meanwhile, back in Springfield, the custodian of the tomb, John Carroll Power, was in a state of panic. If hapless amateurs could come so close to carrying off Lincoln's body, what would happen if professional body snatchers targeted the tomb? The only solution Power could think of was to hide the body where no one could find it. So after dark, Power and 5 friends buried Lincoln in a shallow, unmarked grave in the tomb's basement. None of the men who buried the coffin that night had known Lincoln. They were ordinary people. One was a railroad ticket agent, another a hotel keeper, and the third worked as a bank clerk. Yet it had fallen to them to safeguard the remains of Abraham Lincoln, and they took that obligation seriously, swearing never to reveal the location of the martyred president's body. And in the years that followed, they kept that secret faithfully. They were finally relieved of their obligation in 1901 when, under instructions from Robert Lincoln, the president's only surviving child, Lincoln's body was placed inside a steel cage, lowered into a 10-foot deep vault, and buried under tons of wet concrete. He's still there, in his tomb on the grounds of Oak Ridge Cemetery. So what happened to the criminals? Well, as I mentioned earlier, body snatching wasn't even a crime in Illinois in 1876. Mullen and Hughes were tried and convicted of breaking and entering, receiving just what they thought they would get, 12 months in prison. The mastermind behind the plot, Big Jim Kennelly, fell on hard times, and in 1880 he evidently broke his own rule against getting within touching distance of counterfeit money. He was arrested in St. Louis for being in possession of bogus $10 U.S. Treasury notes. After much legal delay, he was sentenced to serve 1 year in the Illinois State Penitentiary, in the same cell block as his old friend, the engraver, Benjamin Boyd. Oh, and just one more piece of this puzzle you might find interesting. The reason President Lincoln had wanted to go to Ford's Theater to have a break from his hard work that April 14th day in 1865, it seems he had been working extra hard for several long days creating a new department of government to combat the ever-growing problem of counterfeiting. He was going to call this new agency the Secret Service. It remains one of those unique historical coincidences that the agency created for the sole purpose of fighting counterfeit currency and signed off on by President Lincoln on the last day of his life would not only be credited with breaking up the most successful counterfeiting ring in America, but would also by accident end up protecting the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, and every president since. Thank you so much for joining us on There You Go with Bryan. If you enjoy this program and would like to support it, please click the Patreon link below or the Venmo link below. We very much appreciate your support, and until next time, thank you so much.